In the previous tutorial, we focused in on a formatting tool called Black. In this tutorial, we focus in on what is probably the most popular Python linter tool, Flake8. The format of this tutorial is very much like the previous tutorial. If you have seen that, we'll answer what is Flake8, and then we'll move to some demonstrations and showcase how to get started utilizing Flake8. So what exactly is Flake8? Well, it isn't a standalone application. In actual fact, Flake8 is a wrapper around 3 lint tools. In addition to that, what makes Flake8 quite popular is the fact that it does have other extensions that you can add in and include into your workflow. So there are 3 tools or linting tools that come packaged with Flake8. The first one, PyFlakes, the second, pycodestyle, and the third is the McCabe. So first up, PyFlakes. PyFlakes describes itself as a simple program which analyzes your Python source files, programs, and detects various errors. So here, syntactical errors and other type of simplistic errors like that, and some more advanced, so name errors, unused variables or imports, call to unknown functions. PyFlakes is going to detect all of those problems and indicate where those potential errors are in your code. If you have seen the introduction tutorial in this mini series, you would have already covered the idea that we can categorize these linting tools into 2 or 3 categories. So here what we have in PyFlakes is what we described as a logical type of linting tool, whereby it's going to look for code or syntactical errors. So next up, we have the pycodestyle. So this is more of a stylistic type of linting tool. So it's going to check for style conventions and give you indications of where potential errors are in your code. Now, unlike Black, which we saw in the previous tutorial, these tools are going to provide indicators, warnings. They are not going to automatically change the code for you, like you saw with the formatting tool Black in the previous tutorial. The last tool that's packaged up with Flake8 is McCabe. So this feature is quite helpful in detecting over-complex code. It's going to analyze your code and use a cyclomatic complexity metric to indicate the complexity of your program. Ultimately, it's going to provide an indication into the complexity and potentially detect over-complex code. As you might have gathered, cyclomatic complexity isn't something that we can easily explain in a few minutes. I have added some reading materials in the resources should you like to learn a little bit more about the origin and underlying technology. To give you a general idea of how the McCabe linting tool might be utilized is that we would run the McCabe linting tool. It would return potentially a number. And if that number is 10 plus, then that's describing the fact that our code potentially has very high complexity. And we might want to review our code to simplify our code, but it also gives us an indication or a rough indication as to the effort that's going to be required to write tests if we're not running a test-first approach, of course. And then potentially it's also given us a number indicating the probability of our code containing defects or bugs. So let's now move over to some demonstrations. In this demonstration, we are going to be setting up Flake8 utilizing a virtual environment. We are using Visual Studio Code, and the version of Flake8 that we're using is 5.0.4. Please remember that these 3 tools can be quite comprehensive to learn, and the idea or the aim of this demonstration is to get you started using these tools. If you have been following this series from the start, you will need to go over to Code, Preferences, and then Settings, and then go over to the Formatting. If you remember from the previous tutorial, we did set up the formatter for Black, so you just need to remove that as the default option. And then a bit further down, here's the Python formatter provided. So I've moved that back to the default AutoPep8. And then in addition to that, you will also need to just remove the on save. So there should be an option down here, format on save. Format on save. And there we go. So I just removed that too. So I do have a file here. This is just a random file. So if you do have any code, or you can just copy and paste it from somewhere, I'm just using this random set of code, which I'm going to be utilizing, and maybe just add some more later to showcase the features in the tools provided by Flake8. So let's go ahead and create a virtual environment. So I'm going to bring up the terminal here, or just drag from the bottom. And then we're going to create a virtual environment. So Python3 manage.py, VMV. So there is a guide on this for your particular operating system. I'm using MacBook here. So once you've done that, we can go ahead and activate the virtual environment. So on the Mac, we run source, VMV, bin, and then activate, sorry. So there we go. So now we can go ahead and install. So if you head over to the Python package index, let's type in Flake8. I'll just give you an indication because there's a few different options here. So it can be quite difficult to understand potentially if you're new to development, you know exactly which tool that needs to be installed here. So let's go over to Flake8 5.0.4. So just Flake8, and then you can see the version number. So this is the tool that we're going to be installing. You can see the command that's needed to install. So like we've already mentioned, Flake8 is a wrapper around the three tools. So we are going to be installing these three separate tools. So let's go back to our code. Let's go ahead and install. So pip install Flake8. Now, if I were to, for example, run a VEMV pip freeze. So now that's installed, we can check what has been installed by running pip freeze. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to capture all of the dependencies that have been installed, packages that have been installed, into a file. So requirements.txt, it can be whatever you like. So what I now have is a new file here with a list of everything that I've just installed. So we can see we have Flake8, McCabe, the pycodestyle, and PyFlakes. So you might have been wondering all along, what's the point of a wrapper around these three tools? Why not just go ahead and install these three linting tools? Well, Flake8, one of the advantages here is that Flake8 will run all the tools by launching a single command. So you have to be careful here because of the different versions of Python. You may have to run this slightly differently. So it'd be well worth looking at the Flake8 guidelines or manual if you are running Python 3.5 or below. So here I'm running Python 3.8.9, it looks like. At the bottom you can't see that, but that's what it looks like I'm running here. So let's go ahead and run Flake8. So we can run Flake8 by typing in Flake8 and then maybe directing it to a directory. In this case, we're going to be utilizing a file. So I'm going to run Flake8 test.py. So here we have our first error that's been captured, F401. You can see here that we've created an import, but we aren't actually using the import. So this is suggesting the fact that this code shouldn't be included and should be removed. So how is Flake8 generating this information? Well, this information is coming from PyFlakes. Remember, this is one of the linting tools that is installed and Flake wraps around. So if I type in PyFlakes and then identify the file I want to run PyFlakes with, you can see it outputs the same error, OSStat imported but unused. So the 1.1 here is indicating the line and potentially where the error starts in that line. So in this case, 1 and 1. So we have seen how to run individual files, but the likelihood is that you want to run these tools over multiple files or a whole project. So what we need to be careful of here is the vent folder here. So if we were to just run Flake8 and let that go, Flake8 is going to look for everything inside of this folder and all the individual folders inside of that. So it will also come back with results based upon files inside the vent folder here. So that took a couple of seconds, but eventually we have a whole list of potential issues in the code, and most of these are line too long, and that isn't necessarily a problem, and that might just be dependent upon your particular stylistic convention of the amount of characters you wish to utilize for each line. So for the more generic errors that you want to maybe ignore because of a particular reason, you can go ahead and ignore them. So here, let's run Flake8 again. I've just forgotten that I think it was 501, wasn't it? So extend, ignore, and then let's go for E. I think it was 501 or 502. Let's go for 501. So let's ignore these type of errors. So the output this time, you can see that all of those errors have been removed, but there was another common error here. That was a white space issue. So that was E203. So we may also go ahead and just extend that to using a comma, E203, and we can run that again. And hopefully that should now just return the errors inside of this file here. So it looks like there's multiple errors here or potential issues in the vent folder. That doesn't necessarily mean there's errors. We can ignore them. Maybe a better setup for your project is to create a new folder. I'm just going to call this project. I'm just going to add all the files into there. And now I can just go ahead and run Flake8 again and just direct it into that folder called proj. There we go. So let's now go ahead and just change some of the styling here. So let's go ahead and just format some of the white space and also the tabs here, indentation. So let's go ahead and run this Flake8 again. And you can now see that it looks like the pycodestyle has kicked in. And you can now see some outputs here indicating some stylistic issues. You can see that it is fairly consistent in that we're indicating which line the error is from, potentially, and then the second number is indicating where on that line that error might begin. Most of the errors here are fairly simple to understand, or at least easily to utilize then in a search engine or ask someone what the potential problem is. So expected 2 blank lines, found 0 at line 3, 1. So line 3, 1. So we're expecting 2 blank lines here, right? So 4, 9. So 4, 9. See, now the issue is here that when we have multiple outputs like this, if we go step by step, you can see that we now don't have line 4, 9 because we've made a change. So we have to make potentially one change at a time and go ahead and we can run this again. So 6, 9. So 6, 9 over indented, suggesting that we need to bring these back. And then 9, 1, expecting 2 lines. So this time we didn't make a change to the line, so we can go ahead and still read that. So between the classes, there ought to be 2 spaces, recommended at least. So let's go ahead and run it again. So we still got the import, so let's get rid of this import. So maybe we want to just highlight that out, comment that out. So let's go ahead and run again. And you can now see that we don't return any potential errors. So there we were using both the PyFlakes linting tool and also pycodestyle. So let's just go ahead and run pycodestyle, and we'll run that on our folder. And you can see there aren't any errors here. So I just make an error, and you can see now we're returning that error. So you can see what's happening here now. And hopefully it makes it a little bit more understandable what we mean by a wrapper. So Flake8 is a wrapper around these tools. The idea is it is capturing the output of these tools and presenting them back to us as if it was one linting tool. But of course, behind the scenes, multiple linting tools are being utilized. So let's talk a little bit about this last linting tool, McCabe. Okay, so by default, it's not turned on. So what we need to do here is type in Flake8, and then we need to go max to find the max complexity. So let's set that at 10. And then let's now select our project folder. So let's run that. And you can see here that we're just returning the stylistic problem. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's run this again. There we go. So like the other tools, you're only going to receive an output from McCabe if it meets the max complexity, in this case 10. So if your code doesn't meet the complexity, then it's not going to return anything. Like the other tools wouldn't return any errors if it doesn't detect any. Ultimately, if we break this down, the McCabe psychomatic complexity check is going to allow us to identify functions maybe within our code that has lots of loops, if statements, switch cases, and so on. So we'll go for a simple example here and we'll see how the complexity number changes based upon the amount of if statements or loops we have. So let's start really simple. Let's go for if apples in fruit. Let's go ahead and print off something. Let's just print true. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll run McCabe individually. So here what we're going to do, run Python 3, and we're going to run McCabe here because it is installed through when we installed Flake8, and we're going to set the minimum to 2. So if this code meets the minimum of 2, it will return an output. So you can see here I've gone into the project folder and I'm running just this file to begin with. So if I do that, we can see that the minimum was 2 and the output, the complexity check, has returned 2 for this particular statement here. Now watch what happens when, for example, we add more statements inside here. So if say banana in fruits, then we'll print off true. Okay, so let's run this again. And you can now see this second number indicating the complexity. That has moved to 3. So the deeper we go into this if statement, the more complexity that is going to be returned. And like I said earlier, the deeper this if statement is, or nested statements that we use, potentially the more complex or the harder it is for us to test our application, and then potentially the harder it is, or the more likely that we're going to maybe have issues or problems. So the idea is that we're trying to avoid over complex code by avoiding that 10, for example. And if our code does reach that 10, potentially, and only potentially, we might want to consider how our code is structured and restructure it to make it more simplistic, so that potentially our testing is more simplistic and potentially our code won't have any kind of deep-rooted bugs or problems. So let's just keep moving deeper into this. I'll do this a few times. So let's just go for 4 simple if statement, nested statements here. So let's go ahead and run McCabe again, and you can now see we're at 5. So let's go ahead and change the Flake8 max complexity. Let's change it to 5, and then we're going to run this piece of code. So let's go for proj.test.py. So if we run this now, you can now see we are returning. I'll just do this again. I'll clear that, run it again. You can now see that we are returning the max complexity error. Oh, sorry, file not found. Sorry, we're not. We need a dot here, sorry. Okay, blank line. Oh, so we're not returning. Okay, I was expecting that. Let's change that then to 4. And there we go. So 5 is obviously being matched, so it's not over complex. So we changed the max complexity to 4. We know that McCabe is returning 5 complexity for this piece of code here. So therefore we receive the C901 error if 2 is too complex. Okay, so if 2, referring to line 2 here, is suggesting that it's too complex, and it's given us a rating, in this case 5. So it's over the max complexity that we've set for Flake8, which was 4. So hopefully that's given you the confidence to download and start utilizing these linter tools. Now there's bound to be cases where if you're new to Python that you're not going to be able to understand what it is that you need to change, what the message is asking you to do or to perform in your code. And that's not a problem at all, because these tools are very popular. So it's very likely that someone else has had the same problem, and you type that code into Google and it's likely that you're going to receive a result. Now that we've covered both Black and Flake8, let's go ahead and integrate into our environment, our development environment, both Flake8 and Black. If you haven't seen the previous tutorial on Black, then you won't know that Black is a formatter tool, which is going to format your code automatically. Whereas here, the pycodestyle is going to indicate where errors are. Black is going to automatically style your code for you. So let's go ahead, and we don't already have Black, so let's go ahead and install Black here. So we're just going to continue where we left off. So pip install and then Black. So if we were to now update our file here, that should now get updated with some other tools that we've just installed. Now, I forgot about that, so I'll just remove that. So we can see now by installing Flake, in actual fact, it's installed a whole load of other dependencies that look like is needed. But we can see at the top here, we have Black. Like I showed you in a previous tutorial, the Black tutorial, we'll go ahead and create a new folder, VS Code. .vs code, and then inside of here we'll create a new file called settings.json, and then we'll go ahead and just add the configuration for Black to automatically format our code on save. So if you remember from the tutorial, there were 2 options here. So we need to set the editor format on save to true. Now we can go ahead and go into the preference and do that, but we'll utilize this again. It just adds a little bit more flexibility if you are using Visual Studio Code for multiple languages and projects. And then after that, let's just go ahead and define the Python formatting provider. That's going to be Black. So in order for this to work, we need to be careful here. Now, previously I did install the Black extension, so I've removed that. Not that it should matter too much, but if we want to use the Black that we've installed, remember we are working within our virtual environment. So we need to make sure, just get rid of this. We need to make sure, because we're working in the virtual environment, we need to tell Visual Studio Code that we're going to run Python from our virtual environment, so venv bin Python, and not the local version of Python that's installed that we're utilizing when we had the Black extension earlier. So definitely include that, and then let's give this a go. So it may need a restart, but we'll give this a save, and you can see now it's automatically formatting for us. So now this code here has been automatically formatted for us. Let's go ahead and run Flake8 on this piece of code. Oh, Flake8, and it's proj and then test. Okay, so we've still got this issue here. Okay, so we'll remove that, run that again, and it looks like everything is okay. So where you might have a problem is if you start to define different, for example, line lengths. So let me just give you an example here. Let's just remove those. Right, so in the root folder here, I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call this .flake, .flake8. Okay, so inside of here, I'm going to just configure Flake8 max length, also max line length. That's going to be, let's just set it as 20 for now. I can also add extend ignore. So I can actually choose what I want to ignore, for example, as well inside of this file, instead of running it like we saw earlier in the actual command prompt. So let's go back, save that, let's go back there, let's run Flake8 again. So you can see now we've got loads of errors here suggesting that we've got too long a line because we've set the line at 20, and you can see these line lengths are much longer. So even though we were to use Flake8, for example, so even if we were to utilize black is obviously going to be set at a different line length. So without looking at the documentation, I think black defaults to 88 characters per line. So if you are, again, new to Python and you're wondering what's going on here, normally we limit the line length of our code, and that can just make it easier for us to view the code on the page. Let's just call it like that. So we can define the max length of our code before the code will fold over to the next line. So here we're just trying to set up and make sure that black, when we format with black, that Flake8 is using a suitable line length. So here we're going to set black then. So yeah, Flake8 to 88, the default for black, so that we aren't going to cause any problems or errors or produce this line is too long. So let's go ahead and run Flake8 again. Now we've set the line length at 88, and you can see that we don't have any problems. So now we have a basic setup for development. We now have Flake8 and black installed and configured, and you're ready to start developing.